professor, and although I had some reputation because as part of my residency and graduate school work, I wrote some key papers on ketamine, another anesthetic, and separated the isomers of ketamine, one of which is now commercialized in Europe. But I contacted the company, ICI, in the UK and asked about the possibility of becoming involved in early studies with the new emulsion formulation of propofol when it would be introduced in the US. And they introduced me to Stewart Pharmaceutical in Delaware, which was the company that was going to be responsible for organizing the studies in the US.
So when you pursued this with Stewart Pharmaceutical, what did you do?
Well, I called up the representative. Stewart Pharmaceutical, interestingly, is not an anesthesia company. They actually are most well known for antacids. In particular, Mylanta was their big product. So they weren't terribly familiar with anesthesia, and they were very appreciative of input from anesthesiologists at this stage. And I suggested a study that I thought could have great importance because in the ambulatory setting, as I mentioned, the barbiturates which we used had hangover effects and also a high incidence of nausea and vomiting when they were used.
Did they accommodate you in allowing you to study their drug?
Well, I developed a protocol, and it went through review within the company, and they said it sounds interesting. We would support you doing this study, which means they provided a grant for the study, for me to conduct the study, and I obtained Institutional Review Board approval at Stanford and commenced the study in 1993, 94.
What year?
No, I'm sorry, 1983 or 84. I misstated that.
And what was the object of your study? Well, first of all, strike that. They didn't just send you a bucket of propofol. They wanted to know what you're going to do with it first. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a lengthy process. The protocols are reviewed internally within the company, and of course I have a lengthy process at my local institution. So it takes several months to, even after the company gives you the go-ahead, to be able to think about organizing.
Now, when you use the term a protocol, what is a protocol?
It's sort of a template for conducting a clinical study. It describes inclusion, exclusion criteria for patients, the objectives of the study, obviously the detailed methodology that will be used, how the data will be analyzed, and provides a background as to the rationale for conducting the study.
So before they send you any drug or any of the propofol, they want to know exactly what you're going to do with it.
Yeah, they want to read the detailed protocol, correct.
And then they want to know what criteria you're looking for, how you're going to evaluate your criteria, and things of that nature.
Yeah, very detailed methodology is required.
How long did that take you to get that protocol to them?
Well, in those days, things moved quicker than today, so I was able to get that completed in about 6 months.
And did you have any help in developing the protocol, or is this something you did by yourself?
Well, in those days, I was on my own. As a young professor, I didn't have postdocs, fellows, and there were some medical students that would help me out with projects.
So you got to go to your school or your university, get their permission, develop a protocol, send it to them, have them approve it, and then you can start studying it.
Yes, of course, the company has to approve it first because otherwise I can't obtain the investigational drug.
Okay. Now, once you got past the point where they approved your protocol and were willing to send you the drug, what was the next step?
Well, you organize with your surgical colleagues appropriate patient populations to study. I was fortunately able to recruit 2 excellent Stanford medical students to help me with the project. And we got started pretty quickly.
And
I might add, the study was to compare propofol, this new formulation, to the standard at the time, which was the short-acting barbiturate methohexatol. So it was a direct comparison, and both groups also got nitrous oxide for induction and maintenance of general anesthesia.
So basically, you had done a couple papers before this, but this was one of your early papers, is that correct?
Well, I had done several papers. As I mentioned, my PhD thesis was based on the IV anesthetic ketamine and its pharmacology in animals and in humans. So I had probably 10 or 15 publications by the time I started my position at Stanford University.
Your interest was basically in IV anesthetics.
Yeah, I started working in the area when I was a grad student and was fascinated by IV anesthesia, and then after meeting Professor Dundee, my interest kind of grew.
Before then, what was normally used for an anesthetic?
Well, the normal anesthetic involves giving an intravenous drug to put patients to sleep. Many patients think, oh, I just got an IV anesthetic, but in the U.S., typically once you lose consciousness, then the anesthesiologist will turn on a vaporizer and administer what's called a volatile or gaseous anesthetic, along with nitrous oxide, although nowadays nitrous oxide is being used less commonly because of concerns about environmental pollution.
So before you ever actually investigated propofol, you published 15 papers?
I would say approximately, yes.
How many papers have you published relating to your field of anesthesiology?
Close to 450 peer-reviewed publications.
What's a peer review publication?
Well, that's where a manuscript is submitted to a journal and it's sent out for review by experts in the field, and then generally there are various modifications that are made, and if you're successful and I guess a bit lucky, it's accepted for publication. And the process takes about a year all total.
So you send out your manuscript, which is your study, study, which usually involves protocol, the actual investigation, the conclusion. You send that out to a journal and ask them to publish it.
Correct.
They evaluate whether they're going to publish it based upon what they perceive as the merits of the study.
Yeah, it's typically reviewed by 3 experts in the field, and you get back their comments. They're generally blinded, but some reviewers reveal their names. So.
Now, you've actually had 435 published?
Well, there's a few others that are in lesser journals that I don't list. But yes, that's the number of publications called PubMed, which is a common reference source.
Okay, after doing the first 15 and you started on propofol, did you have a series of studies that were published concerning propofol?
Yeah, after completing the initial study, which demonstrated that using propofol instead of the barbiturate allowed patients to not only awaken quicker but ambulate sooner, and they had 50% less postoperative nausea and vomiting. And it was very exciting. I mean, there was a press conference with a local TV station and tremendous interest in the potential of this drug for day surgery. And after that, I went back to the company and asked them if I could perform a follow-up study in patients having major surgery where we would focus on trying to understand the pharmacokinetics and dynamics of the drug so we could use it better during surgery. As you pointed out earlier, that it was not usual to use an IV anesthetic for induction and maintenance of anesthesia in the U.S. So we needed to kind of define the parameters of dose and response.
Now, at the time that you're doing this, propofol's not even FDA approved, is it?
Oh, no. This is 1986, and it was approved in 1989 for use in general anesthesia.
So you had spent 6, 7 years researching propofol before you could finally even get it approved for use in the United States?
Well, I don't get it approved. The FDA does the approving, and the company submits it. But I started working with propofol in 1983, and it was approved 6 years later in 1996. In 1986, I apologize.
Since you started studying this and writing papers on it, Your Honor, I have an exhibit I'd like to mark as
Triple X.
referring to triple X. Dr. Schaefer, is this an itemization of 36 studies that you've done that deal with propofol?
I'm Dr. White.
I mean, Dr. White, excuse me.
Dr. White, Dr. Schaefer's a good friend, and he actually helped me on one of the papers.
I'm showing you Exhibit triple X. That involves page one. Your Honor, it's a 6-page document. The first 3 pages constitute an itemization of 36 studies done by Dr. White involving propofol only. Is that correct, Doctor?
Yes, it is. And the study I was referring to actually as the first study, which was conducted in the U.S., was the comparison of propofol with methotrexate, and that's published in 1986.
That's number 4 on that?
That's number 4, yes, sir.
Now, you published in 86. When did you start the study?
The study was started in about 1983.
So it's a 3-year study. Now, I noticed that...
No, the study was completed within 6 to 8 months. But it requires time to analyze the results, to prepare the manuscript, and to go through the review process, and then the publication delays. So that's not unusual.
I noticed that your name is the third name up there. There's Doze, looks like Westfall, and White. Was this Doze's study, or was it your study?
Well, Van Does and Westfall were both medical students at Stanford, so it was my study, and I conducted the anesthesia.
How come your name appears last?
Because frequently as a senior author or principal investigator, you'll put your name in either the last position or the third position if there are many more authors.
I noticed there's a lot of studies up there. Your name is in the... I guess those are when you're the only one on the study. Looking at number 9, I see the name Schaefer, A. Was that another study done by you?
Yes, it is.
Who was the principal investigator on that?
Well, I designed the study, organized the study, and Dr. Audrey Schaefer was my second fellow. So she had actually just completed medical school. She had not had any postgraduate training in anesthesia, but she had completed her medical education. And Van Does, again, was a medical student, and then Stephen Schaefer, who was also a medical student at the time, helped out with aspects of the data analysis and modeling.
And you set up the parameters for the study?
Yes.
Now, both Schaefers, they were Mr. or Dr. and Dr. Schaefer?
Yes, they
were
married.
When did you meet them?
I met the Schaefers probably in 1981, shortly after I arrived at Stanford. They came by to talk to me about doing research in anesthesia.
In addition to these studies that you've published, have you done any research investigation regarding benzodiazepines?
Yes, I actually did one of the first studies with midazolam when it was introduced for sedation during local anesthesia with some plastic surgery colleagues, and a study involving using midazolam for induction of anesthesia in the mid-1970s. Midazolam is also known as Versed. It remains a very popular sedative.
I note that there's 18 studies listed under the relevant clinical studies involving benzodiazepines.